So here we are with another video for the EMG-6, and today we're going to be talking about how do we join the pilot seat section shown here in purple with the rest of the structure. Now so far we've built the seat using the fixtures that we had, and it looked something like this, and we simply formed that simple seat frame member that we can now position onto the frame, and it'll position into the aircraft in that position. But what we really have right now is the simple frame seat shown with in purple, and then we have this portion of the frame which is also manufactured. But we need to combine those two together and attach that kind of out in outer space. And so it's going to be positioned somewhere out here. So here's how we're going to do that. That forms the primary positioning for all of the rest of the members to attach to in the structure. So we're going to use a fixture that we made up earlier, and this is for cockpit positioning is what it's called. And it consists of these simple components, and they look something like this. And so they will hang on to the main spar up front and to the seat cross member that's right in there, and then the seat position simply fits into these machined out sections, both front and back. So what we're going to do is we're going to position that between the frame itself. And once we hold that up into position, then what we have to do is we have to cut this tube, and that's what we'll be doing on this video, is cutting this tube and installing that using these fixtures so that you can see how we get that first piece kind of stuck out there in outer space, and then we can start attaching all of the rest of the other structural members to it off of that, looking something like this, where we have these will now be able to tie in. That will allow us to tie in this, what we call the gearbox section, because the landing gear fits down through here. So that gearbox section will now be able to tie into that. And so this seat is kind of one of the more primary segments of the frame structure, and positioning it correctly allows us basically to attach everything else to that, making the whole welding and fixturing setup pretty simple. So this is one of the last segments of fixturing here that we're going to need fixtures for in order to position this frame properly. Okay, so we're now down here at the fuselage, and we showed before the seat that we want to install, and that's going to be sticking out here in outer space like we said. There is a forward and an aft section, and on this one here I'm going to come up and I'm going to show you some of the marks that we made. That was nice. Some of the marks that we made that are going to go to the instrument panel, and they go forward. And you can see other seat tabs in the back, so it's easy to keep track of which one is which. The marks are kind of worn off on this, but we did have the part number on here so that we can keep track of whether it's forward or aft. So we'll just position that in position. Everything else is prepped really at this point, so we're going to grab the fuselage fixture for the seat, or what we call the cockpit positioning fixture. And this one's been used on several other airframes already, but all we're going to do is just lift it up into position, hang this over the top of the spar, and simultaneously have it rest right on this position right here. And we're going to want to center it up close there. And then the next step is we'll position the seat on the bottom of this. I've got a couple clamps here. And this is made pretty simple. Simply center this up here, slide it into the seat position. And I'm going to stick inside a little block. I'll use that just to clamp to. Clamp right to the bottom of the tube. That's up in position. and now I can use a clamp on either side of this. And as a part of the welding, it's not uncommon that you'll end up with a little bit of warpage that will take place. And what this will do is this will allow us to take that warpage out while we're positioning the thing. And once again, we will take measurements. 2.1. 2.1. So that's just about perfect right there. Everything else is set up. So now all we have to do is we have to cut our tubes that are going to attach from here to here. That'll be our first set of tubes, and that'll kind of lock this back one in position, and then we can start building off of that with the other tubes. So we'll go down to the other shop and we'll start working on those tubes using the templates that we've manufactured. So we're getting ready to attach the pilot's seat to the rest of the frame, and the two tubes that initially make that happen are the passenger seat transition tubes, and those are part number 53-10-04.102, right and left. And so we're going to open up the first one in a PDF format, and we'll print that. So we'll print, and we're going to use OfficeJet 6700. We've got it set to 100% scale, and it's landscape. That all looks good, so we'll go ahead and print that. And then we will print the reverse side as well. And here's what the reverse side looks like. And in this case, you can see all we've done is we've simply flipped the format of the original template. That keeps us from having to duplicate drawings and the potential for making a mistake. And all you're really interested in is the template outline anyway. So you don't even have to print the reverse side. You can simply print two of the others. However, the alignment marks and stuff on this reversed print make it a little bit easier to work with. So anyway, we'll go ahead and print this as well. And once again, we're going to print with OfficeJet 6700 and 100% scale, and we're going to go to landscape, and that all looks good, and we'll print that as well. So once we've got these printed, we can go cut some tubes, and we'll see how that goes. Okay, so we brought our templates out to the table out here so that we can cut them out, and we've got both a left-hand position and a flipped over component, which will mirror that to make the right-hand component. So we'll need to cut both of these out. I'll start here with the mirrored side. This is a pretty simple process. Just take your template. Before you do that, you'll notice that there is a dimension mark on the template. Sometimes you have a printer that's not working exactly like it should, and so it will print just a little bit off. So we've put on marks on here so you can check the scale of your drawing, both X and Y axis. We've got another mark over here that's 2.36. This one happens to be 2.48, and you can see I've measured on this one right here, and it looks like it's exactly right on the money. So at least we've verified that our printer is working like it should. So we're good to go there. Let's go ahead and we'll cut this out. Pretty simple, quick process to do this. We're simply going to take a straight edge, and we've got a little scale here with made out of plastic, so it's translucent. We can see through it. Kind of helps line it up during the cutting process. And we'll just use the straight edge for all the really long straight pieces that we need to cut out. And a sharp X-Acto knife. On the ends, you can just kind of freehand those. Compared to the old days when we used to do this by fitting it up against the fuselage and then trim it a little bit off and go fit it a little bit more and then trim it, boy, this is night and day from those days. This makes it so easy to do. So we'll cut these end pieces off. They have all the copes just in the right spot. And you have to remember that you don't have to be exactly perfect on this. You're going to be welding this. And then these are going to be just marks. We aren't actually going to cut the tube in these positions. These are going to be marks for where the seat tabs go. So we'll go ahead and cut these out as well. And then we can mark them. And that goes pretty quickly as well. And once again, if you've got a nice X-Acto knife, you can drag it and it'll stay pretty straight during the dragging process. You've got good control over the whole process. Cut each one of those out. There's another little section right on the top. And we'll cut those out as well. Once we've done that, all we have to do is find ourselves a tube that's the right tube. And we can wrap this around the tube. So there we have our template. That's complete at this point. So let's go find us a tube. That'll be our next section, and we can wrap that around. I left this one uncut so that we can take a look, and it says that what we're looking for is a 0.75 3/4 inch diameter tube on the outside, 0.049 inch wall thickness, and it needs to be about 10.48 inches long. So let's get that first. So here we found a piece of tube that looks like it's the right size tube, so we're going to take some dimensions on it just to make sure. In this case, 0.748, that's within the tolerances. And we're going to measure wall thickness, but there's a little burr on this, so we're going to deburr this. And then we can take a nice clean measurement on that. We're looking for 0.049, and that's exactly like what it's showing there. So this is the right size tube. Let's make sure it's long enough. We needed, looked like 10.48, and we got a little extra there. So let's just go ahead and I'm going to do this. I've got a cheating method that I like to use for this. So if we're going for 10.48, and I'll lock it in position. Then I'll kind of take a close ballpark of where this is at, and I'll mark it with a black magic marker. And then I can hold this, and rather than scratching the tube, I can just take a little mark right off of the end of that. And now I've got myself a mark on exactly where I need to be for the length of that. And so now we've got to cut that off. Many different ways to do that. We can use a hacksaw, bandsaw, steel cutting bandsaw. We happen to cheat here in the shop. We've got a little lathe that makes that pretty simple. So we're going to go over to the lathe and we'll cut that off using the lathe. And take it out of the lathe, and then we'll take a couple measurements just to make sure that we got it in the ballpark. This even in itself isn't that important either, because we're going to be cutting the ends of the tube, so when we lay our template over the top of this, even if it's off just a little bit, we're still marking to exactly the right dimensions on the tube. So now we've got to line this thing up, and that can be kind of a bugger. If it's off at all, it's going to screw up everything. So we've come up with a little quick trick for this. Works great. Home Depot, Lowe's, something like that, any hardware supply, get yourself a little piece of aluminum channel, and depending on the thickness of the tube, the diameter of the tube, you may need a little smaller or bigger one. We've got 3 different sizes that we use. That holds that perfectly parallel when you have the 2 faces against there, and so now we're able to make a line that lines up perfectly parallel with the tube, and we can use it as our reference point on the tube itself. And so what we're going to do is line up that edge, and actually I'm going to need a little tape. So we're going to line this right up on the edge and go right to the end of our tube measurement there. Lay that out. Same thing on this end. Actually, you don't want to cover up those spots where we're going to have to mark. And simply roll this up, and a couple more pieces of tape. And You just kind of pull it around the corner as you go. They're designed to have just a little gap at the end. And now all we do is we will mark the positions where the seat tabs are going to go for later reference. And I like to just give them a nice coating so that they don't rub off real easy, and they'll give us long lasting, while we're handling the thing, that those marks don't go away. And we'll mark those tabs. While you're doing this, we're also checking to make sure that our alignment marks, so that it didn't get askew during the alignment process. Now all we do is simply, and I put tape right over where I'm supposed to mark. That was kind of dumb. And so I'll just kind of interpolate there a little bit, and right around there. And you can mark right up onto the paper, because it'll only mark where the marker is able to hit them. And once I've got these marked, I'm done. Okay, now the next step is we simply take the template off of there, and I'm going to use my X-Acto knife to make this easier. I can just peel those back. And now I'm ready to cut those ends. And we'll have it ready to bolt onto the airplane. So, we're done with the marking and the cutting of the template and the tube. Now we'll go over to the grinder and we'll cut this thing. Okay, so we're going to be grinding off the ends of these tubes using this little grinder here. And this is simply a little quarter cable bench grinder. It's not very big. We actually like the small size of the thing. And what we're going to do is, we've got our marks on here that show up real easy, so we're just going to grind those away. Every once in a while, stop and cool the part down. If it gets too hot, it'll start to dissipate your marks, so you don't want to lose your marks. Just continue to cool it down. This is so easy compared to cut and fit method. And you can really trust the marks on these. Just grind right all the mark off of there. It looks like we've done a pretty good job on this one. One little spot there. And that looks really good. Let's do the other side. Before we finish the other side though, let's just grind this one, put it on the wire wheel, and we'll just deburr it. So on the wire wheel, we've got the end all cleaned up now with a little rag. We can clean that off and it'll make for a really nice welding surface. Let's finish the other side up real quick. reburr it. Okay, looking good. That's ready to go right onto the airplane. We've got our marks for our seat tabs still intact, and even our centerline mark if we needed to measure something. And you'll be surprised at how well it will fit onto the airframe. Okay, we have finished up cutting the tubes using the templates that we have, and then our next step after that was to come down to the fixture and start prepping them to go onto the fixture. We have double checked our positioning. We're actually using a micrometer, or not a micrometer but a caliper, and we've checked side to side, and we've checked the positioning of this, and then we've checked the position of the top so that we verified we've got it in position. And then we've used some clamps to hold everything in position so that it can't move and it's held properly during the whole process. And so now the next step is to fit these tubes to the airframe. And we have already done a little pre-cutting here to make this simpler for the video. And I'll show you where the big problems lie when it comes to fitting these things. When you have your pre-welded components, a lot of times there's a lot of excess weld on there. And so we've trimmed just a little bit of that bead off there. Because the CNC drawings, or because the CAD drawings are done pretty much in a really clean environment, it doesn't take into account the differences in welding and stuff like that. So we have taken just a little bit of that off there, and then these are designed to fit in this position here where it comes to the outside, and that kind of ties these two tube halves together. But if you look on the drawings, the way that that's made up, we have to bevel the inside of these in order to get it to fit far enough up onto that. So there's one of two choices: either you bevel that, or you have to cut it back far enough to where it'll fit. The next area of difficulty will be where it fits onto the frame in here. And because these are round tubes, it doesn't just naturally slide into place. There's always going to be a centering position. So in this case right here, we've cut it down, we've got it pretty close, but we have to kind of pop it into position in there. And you don't want too much tension on there, but we'd like it to be a nice tight fit. Now the only other area where we need to, because this is just out in outer space here, is you have to remember that this is the passenger seat. So what we have to do is we have to ensure that that sheet metal that fits on there is going to be flat. And you can see we've got a gap right in there. So we're just going to push that, and we're going to cut it and fit it right up to where it is a nice flush fit. And then we can use this also if you've been cutting. I think I'll steal one of these other clamps over here. If you've been cutting and fitting this, you can go ahead and put another clamp onto this, especially if it got a little bit loose and it's not holding exactly in position, and that'll ensure that this portion is parallel when that seat pan goes to fit in there. And then of course we've done the same thing with the other side. We've cut it and we've fit it in there. So our next step is we're going to leave it clamped in this position, and we'll go ahead and tack weld it in place, and then we can remove some of the fixtures after we've got it welded in place and finish up the weld. So let's start with that. We'll get the welder out and get ready to do that. So in this segment right here, we're tack welding the transition tube once it's positioned in place from the seat frame to the forward bulkhead. And it's necessary to get a fairly substantial tack weld so that we can remove the wood and clamps and have access to the rest of the tube. Right now there's not enough of access to the back side of the tubes that we can really work. So once we've got it tacked, we'll remove the clamps and get everything out of our way. Then we can go ahead, get our hands in there, get our torch in there, and add some more welds. At this point, we like to tack the tube at each end, usually in 3 to 4 different locations around the perimeter of each weld. And what that will do is that will help keep the tube from wanting to shrink up in one direction or another, and it helps keep the frame aligned during the welding process. And we'll typically go back and forth from each one of the welds so that we can maintain tension evenly from weld to weld, keep the part from moving during the whole process. Once we've got enough of a tack weld in place, we can start running some beads, and we can run those beads pretty much as far as comfortable. Once we've got pretty good attachment at each one of the welds, then we can remove the rest of the structure and we'll have access to the bottom sections of the welds. Okay, so we just finished up welding in the seat transition tubes, and that was a pretty significant part of the welding. Even though it's pretty simple to weld in place, and we've shown how easily that goes from start to finish, all of the other tubes now really kind of rely on this seat box in order for us to be able to assemble the rest of the frame. So stay tuned for additional videos. We'll show you how the rest of this is going together as we progress along with this airframe.